Welcome to this special edition podcast to celebrate the launch of the You've Got This book. On this episode, I am sharing my interview with the amazing Laura Tenison with you. Laura is the founder of JoJo Maman Bébé, and she founded it in 1993. She built a property business in France before that to create the capital that she needed to develop a brand of high-end clothes at mid-market prices that weren't just pretty, but they were also practical and helped to solve the issues that parents faced. In 2022, Laura stepped away from that business and started a new venture in Wales called Wonderful Escapes, which is a hospitality business. She also supports and invests in small businesses and continues to be a really active player in the space of small business brand and development. I hope you really love this podcast. I enjoyed recording it. Enjoy. Okay, so can you start the very beginning? You said you had a business when you were at school. So obviously you had that entrepreneurial spark from a really young age.
Yes, some people think that you can teach entrepreneurialism, and I think you can probably encourage people to think about it. But actually, I believe it's innate, and some people are just born with the inability to not question gaps in the market or operational processes, or you see people sort of standing at the airport looking at the way that security is happening, just tut-tutting, saying this is ridiculous, it should be better, it should be that. And other people just stand there like sheep, kind of accepting the status quo. And I guess I was one of those who questioned everything. So literally from a small child onwards, I would question why things were done in a certain way. And I wasn't prepared to accept the status quo as the way it should be. And I always felt there could be a better way. And maybe that's an arrogance, or maybe it's an intrinsically practical nature, that I would look at something and think, well, I'm sure I can do that better. And so it really started from when I was at my first business, although I'd been entrepreneurial since I was in my single digit years. My mother encouraged me to earn my own pocket money. So when you give your child tasks that earn pocket money, and you want pocket money because it's the only way to be able to buy your comic or your sweets or whatever you like, the little luxuries in life, your parents may be slightly foolish if they give you a certain task to do, because you might think, well, I can earn more and more and more pocket money. So yes, so I think my first proper business that wasn't sort of earning a bit of pocket money was in my teenage years, where we were growing up in quite a conservative time, where our parents would like us to go to parties dressed modestly. And being very excited about fashion from a young age, I had various influences. And Laura Ashley, much though I admired her business acumen, her dress style was not one of them. And yet our parents would have loved us all to go out in Laura Ashley long skirts and frilly blouses. Whereas I was much more of I wanted to wear a sort of Mary Quant esque type mini skirt. In those days, lycra had just been invented. So I decided we were going to make our own. And I made for myself various outfits out of bits of secondhand fabric, taught myself to sew, taught myself how to make patterns, and used to make myself outfits, which we would wear underneath the modest dresses. And then you'd whip them off on the way to the party, making sure that whoever was picking you up, there was always an older boy who would be picking you up and giving you a lift, growing up in Wales. So there would always be someone picking you up, or your parents might be dropping you off or whatever in the early years. But as soon as possible, you got an older boy to come and pick you up. And then you'd whip them off. And of course, that became, other people wanted the same thing. So I used to then start making them for my friends. And that developed into me making men's clothes. And I launched my first business when I was about 16. It was called Distinctive Silks. And I made very ornate, elaborate men's clothes out of extremely beautiful fabrics. And unfortunately, it worked well as a cottage industry, but the fabrics were very expensive. And I carried on with that business all through my A-level years, but the fabrics were so expensive. Some of them actually had real gold thread running through them. I used to make for people's weddings and make sort of waistcoats and brocade ties, and I couldn't really. I tried growing the business by outsourcing to other people, but if they messed up the cutting, that would set me back so far because the fabric was so expensive. So that business I learned very early on. I kept it as a side hustle, but I learned very early on that if you have a business that you are the only person who can make whatever you do, for instance, whether you're an author or whether you're a plumber or whether you need to be able to train other people to do what you do in order to scale the business on the whole, particularly if it's a business with a commodity, because otherwise, you're only as good as your own time. And no matter how hard I worked, I could never really see how it would become a viable business. So that set me off away from haute couture, because haute couture, this little business, Distinctive Silks, I ran it for about 3 years whilst doing other things. And during that time, I became really influenced by Vivienne Westwood. And I thought that Vivienne Westwood was the coolest person in the world. And I loved her style. I loved her anarchy. And I thought that this was exactly the sort of business that I would like to run. But she also, I remember hearing her speak, and she told me that she made no money out of the business. The only way they made money was out of sponsorship. And I felt that was just wrong, that you should be able to make money out of your product. So that set me off on a whole new sort of idea about looking at commercial businesses. But I didn't want to run a business where you sold low quality goods for low prices. I wanted to find a way to sell upmarket goods at mid-market prices, because I felt that every part of the population, every socioeconomic group could save up to buy a good quality piece of clothing as a special treat for a birthday party, to be a bridesmaid at a wedding, to give someone as a gift for a new baby, for instance. And I felt that, but having good quality clothes in every which way made sense. Having clothes that you invested in and you kept for a long time. And actually, I didn't at that stage, when I stopped running Distinctive Silks, I didn't at that stage know that I would start a children's wear brand a few years later, because I was only about 18 when I gave up Distinctive Silks. But I did know that whatever I did, I didn't want to have to rely on myself to be the machinist. So I knew that I needed to get to a size of business where I would be able to manufacture in factories, or ultimately have my own factories in the long term. So there was no sort of great ambition to grow an enormous company. So from my teenage years, I knew I wanted to be in business. I knew that I found it very difficult working for other people. And in fact, at one stage, twice in my life, I've worked for other people. And both times, the first time, my managing director told me that it would be a very good idea if I went to work for someone else, because he was so fed up with me telling him how to run his company. And bearing in mind, I was the junior in one of the departments. It was a publishing company, and I was the junior and copy chaser, having just come in from school. And he was the CEO of the company. But I'd sought him out and told him several times that things were being inefficiently run, and my line managers weren't taking any notice when I suggested to them that we could improve the systems. And I managed to sort of corner him in the lift. And in fact, he, to be fair to him, he became very friendly, possibly with hindsight in an inappropriate way, because he actually invited me to his house a few times, which was actually totally inappropriate for a relatively large company. But during those meetings, we did discuss it, and he did also encourage me, saying, you really should run your own company, which was kind of nice to have that endorsement. But at the same time, he told me that it was probably better if I didn't work for his anymore. So in effect, I was being sacked. Nowadays, it would be called constructive dismissal. It's possible also that I didn't yes, I wasn't acquiescing to his approaches, which was an absolutely fair. I was an adult by that stage, so there was nothing particularly wrong with it, apart from he was twice my age and married. But so these are all things. These are all sort of life's lessons that you go through. But as I say, actually, I found that his advice about starting my own business and starting a proper business rather than having a side hustle was probably a good thing to do.
Mm. So you went from distinctive silks, obviously went into employment. What was the spark that started the brand that you're very, very well known for?
So after Six Silks, I did a couple of years traveling in the Middle East, where I was, to all intents and purposes, look at Middle East and Far East, and I was, to all intents and purposes, looking for starting to set up a supply chain. So I spent some time in the Middle East, including going to Syria to look for silks. I spent 6 months in India, where I was again looking for fabrics, looking for suppliers, talking to factories. And I didn't entirely know what type of retail business I wanted to run. But I knew I wanted to run a fashion company. So I started to build up contacts, and it gave me an opportunity to go traveling. And during that period, as I said, I was very certain of what I wanted to do. So I came back after a period of traveling and wrote a business plan for another menswear business. Took it to about 5 high street banks. They all refused me. Now, they refused me in a very patronizing way. And in those days, bank managers tended to be men. And if you had a business plan, you wanted to borrow some money, you had to go in with your business plan. And it was a sort of hand written, hand completed spreadsheet before the days of Excel. And you had your cash flow forecasts and what sort of funding you needed to support your business venture. And obviously, you had your text, which you would have typed up on a computer, on a typewriter in those days. I couldn't believe that none of these businesses had the in sort of foresight to see that all I wanted was a working capital overdraft. So I decided that I would move away from retail for a short while, because the reality is, starting a fashion company when you don't want to be hand to mouth, and like I had been with my first business, where I was running it as a sole trader and making everything myself, does require a bit of capital. And you need to invest in your stock, your fabrics, your supplies. I wanted to run everything by mail order. It was the very early days of catalogs, so I wanted to run a catalog. So whilst that process was going through, I'd also one of the things actually that the one of the bank managers said to me was, why aren't you asking your friends and family to support this business? And I said, I don't want to do that. I've never asked for anything. I'm very proud, and I would rather go have a commercial deal with the bank. You borrow money, you pay for it. It's not, no one's doing you a favor. The banks want to lend you money. I have a viable business idea. I have a business track record. Even though it was a simplistic business, I could show them that I knew how to run a small business. Anyway, I got very disillusioned, but that I wasn't going to raise this money. I only needed £50,000, which of course in those days was probably more like £500,000. And I had a little bit of money to put down. One of my brothers had given me £2,000 as a deposit, or lent me £2,000 as a deposit. So I had a little bit of my own money. I saw a gap in the market for a French property company. Completely randomly, I'd gone to France with a friend who wanted to buy a house. And as a side line, I had also been renovating houses. So I had taught myself how to be a sort of DIY builder anyway, which was, again, just something that I've been doing on the side. So I'd gone to France, and she wanted to buy a house in France. I happened to speak French because I'd been brought up in Brussels at one stage. I happened to know a bit about building works, and I saw a gap in the market for a French property agency selling houses to the British, because everywhere we went, we had appalling service. So I actually jumped ship from fashion, launched a French property company, ran it for 2.5 years, sold it for about £50,000. So took my first £2,000 and turned it into £50,000. And actually that was, it sounds very easy, but you could, there's a whole story there, but we're not even going to go there. So I had my £50,000 startup, sold, that property company was called Aquila Property Services, sold Aquila, and came back to the UK intending to run another menswear business because I kept seeing a gap in the market for interesting menswear. Fortuitously, I had this head-on collision, which is the result of which I'm still suffering from today. I was literally about to sell the French business and had a head-on collision, was left in hospital for a few weeks recovering. There'd been no room in the orthopedic ward, so I had been put in a cancer ward. My roommate was a young mum with two small children. She had terminal cancer, very sad. I had orthopedic problems, was getting better slowly. She was getting worse slowly, but she'd been in hospital for some time. And she was trying to keep herself sane by buying clothes for her toddlers in the years after she was going to be dead to help her husband. A very sad story. But she was actually full of positivity, and it was great seeing this family come to visit her every evening. And during the day, we used to chat quite a bit, and I'd sort of tell her what I was planning to do, and she said, "Oh God, children's fashion is awful at the moment." And I had both legs in traction, and my mouth was wired shut, and I had a head brace and all sorts. I couldn't really move, but I did have my arms free, and so I could sketch. And so I would literally, she would sort of throw me over a catalogue. She was bedbound and I was bedbound. She'd throw me over something and she'd say, "Look at this, it's just so awful." And I'd then sketch something in the margin and throw it back to her and say, would that work for your children? And so between us, we kind of came to all sorts of practical solutions for dressing children. It kind of passed the time of day. And that sparked the idea for JoJo. So basically, being in hospital after this horrendous car crash and having time to think, and I got so fired up and excited about this potential for expanding the children's wear market and designing practical solutions for everyday needs, things that would help make the life of a parent a little bit easier. I got so passionate about it. I could just see, well, here I have this incredible blank canvas where with this market where there are so few products, and I can be as imaginative as I want. And so that sort of started me off. And I came out of hospital. I was in a wheelchair for a few months. I came out of hospital with, masses of ideas, changed track completely, set up a JoJo, but I was doing my market research. I used to sit in my wheelchair and go to baby shows. I had a friend who used to push me around, and we'd go to baby shows, and we went to and stood outside Mother Care in Oxford Street. And I did market research, and I was trying to talk to mums with young babies. And the amazing thing about being in a wheelchair is that you're at the same height as the baby in the pram. So you have this eye contact. But people gave me so much time and so much help. And I knew nothing about, I had no children of my own. I knew very little. And anyway, I came up with the idea that, yes, I was going to solve the problems for parents of how you dress your baby. So we came up with all sorts of little ideas. And I, looking at your nursery and your children's wardrobe today, I genuinely feel that so many of the household essentials and the everyday the everyday details in children's clothing that you take for granted, such as a fold over cuff on a sleep suit for a newborn baby, stop them scratching their face. Well, actually that came about because when I, 2 years later, 2 or 3 years later, after starting JoJo, I did have my first baby, and you still had to have little scratch mitts would be put on. And this baby, my baby would just kick the scratch mitts off in no time at all. I was like, well, that's ridiculous. We'll sort that on. And the same problem with, socks and shoes falling off. I designed a sleep suit, a snow suit that had a fold over for your foot. It was just obvious, So all these sorts of things that I brought to market 30 years ago have now they've been copied and incorporated. And I made some of them, I was the first to design. Some of them, someone else had the same idea in, Ulaanbaatar or whatever, and someone had made it. But so when I look through the early years of JoJo, what we really did well was fill those gaps that other bigger companies just hadn't thought of, or it was too complicated for them to do. So whether that be a baby-sized wetsuit, that again, I absolutely felt that making baby-sized wetsuits was essential. I had 2 children by the time we designed the wetsuits, because my oldest, I would take 2 children to a swimming pool. My oldest was a tubby little baby, and would play in the water happily for 2 hours. My youngest was a skinny little thing and would be absolutely freezing within 20 minutes. And you're stuck. One is crying because they don't want to get out of the pool. One's crying because they want to stay in the pool. The
Yeah.
solution was obvious. Put the little one in a wetsuit. He was fine. He stayed in the wetsuit for ages. And within the first 5 minutes of taking that homemade item into the swimming pool, people were saying, "Where did you get that?" And
Wow.
it's amazing how customer gets customer in this industry.
Yeah. I mean, obviously on the way to growing the business to the point you kind of started it, you had blocks with not being able to get the finance, not having the knowledge. You said you learned how to cut patterns, you taught yourself all of this.
Yes.
Thinking about the kind of JoJo journey, what other blocks did you have along the way? Did you ever really doubt yourself? Did you have people just telling you it wouldn't work? What kind of things did you experience?
Well, I think what was so interesting was that first knockback from the banks when I was trying to start my first company, my first fashion company, before I went off and did the service industry. So a fashion company requires a lot of capital to start up. A service industry doesn't. You can literally, you can set yourself up as an agent. Obviously, there's probably a little bit more regulation these days than there was in those days. But you could set yourself up as a property search agent with a couple of ads in the back of a magazine in those days, working from your bedroom. Whereas a fashion company, it's obviously more complicated, a lot more capital investment. So, but the banks turning me down for that first loan, and then me going back to those same banks 2.5 years later, when I built my service industry up and sold it as a going concern, they all were suddenly interested, and they wanted a bit more of a track record. On one side, I accept banks are not charities; they are, they're commercial ventures. But on the other side, I think there was a certain level of sexism there, and I think what the negativity taught me, and it wasn't just the banks turning me down in the early years, it was other people. In fact, my own father turned me down. I have 3 older brothers, each of whom I felt got a great deal more support than I did as the youngest girl. And I accept my father was of a generation, but he genuinely did think that I was a girl, and my role in life was to get a nice little job, get married, and have children. And he didn't approve of me wanting to start my own business. And I think those early setbacks, including the boss who was twice my age, who invited me back to his house a couple of times, and I spurred his approaches. All of that could be seen as a negative in
Mm.
life. I'm just incredibly lucky to see them all as a positive, because they fired me up. They made me even more determined to succeed, to the extent that even my eldest brother, who was incredibly supportive, and he was the one who lent me the £2,000 to get going in the early years. When I got pregnant with my first child, he literally said to me, "Well, that's it now, isn't it? All your ambition's going to go. You're going to become a mum." He now states he did that to rile me. I doubled my turnover each year I had a child, because I was
No.
so determined not to be yet another woman who falls by the wayside, because actually having a sleepless night is really tough. And it is really tough. But the thing is, if you are having sleepless nights, you may as well spend the time working. It's so I'm not sort of trying to set unacceptable standards for a lot of women. I can survive on very little sleep. But the truth is, I was running my own company, learning as I went. My children were the most amazing guinea pigs, not to mention free models that I used. I definitely sort of worked the poor little mites. They ended up being extra good models for me. But I do think that so many of those early setbacks were also a learning curve and a challenge. And if you have the attitude that you won't accept no for an answer, and that every time someone tells you you can't do it, it makes you more determined, then I think that's what the entrepreneurialist characteristic is, that you're born with, rather than something that can be taught. In fact, a lot of my early years in business were very, very tricky. My aim to make good quality clothes at mid-market prices, rather than end up making very expensive good quality clothes. Because the trouble is, when you're making small production runs, you pay an awful lot more. It's almost cheaper to make 1,000 pieces of one garment than 100 pieces.
Yeah.
And so I really struggled in the early years to find factories who would make those small runs in good quality at an affordable price, so that I could stay middle market. And I used to make in this country, in the UK, and I made in France and Belgium. But it was becoming a little bit too complicated and expensive. And then I came across some traders in a Paris trade show who'd come from Colombia, and the EEC, as it was in those days, was promoting non-drugs trade out of Colombia. And they had sponsored these factory owners to come to this fashion trade fair. And they were sitting around the back of the trade fair in a dusty sort of little. The only reason I came across them was because it was on the way to the loo. And there they were, looking forlorn. They'd been promised this show stand, come out all the way from Colombia, some of them from deep in the mountains, and were really trying to make a go of it. Some of them were women with just, a couple of machinists. Some of them had, factories making with 120 machinists. And they were there, and I stopped and talked to them, and I said, "Gosh, what are you doing here? It's not the sort of thing I was expecting to see." And they explained that they'd been sponsored to come here, but they weren't getting any orders. And I said, "Well, look, I wasn't thinking of making in Colombia, but these are my samples." And I had some quality samples that I'd made myself as an example of what sort of thing. "These are my patterns that I'd drawn out. These are my specs. Do you think you can make these for me? But I only need to make 50 of a style." And they were like, "Yes, sure, no problem." So literally the next week, I got a flight to Colombia, an overnight bus to Cali, which is the cocaine capital of the world. And
Nice.
no 25-year-old girl in their right mind would go to Cali on an overnight bus. Anyone who's seen any of the sort of South American drug films will know it's quite tough. My mum, who kind of heard of this story, was absolutely horrified and said, "This is madness. You're going to get kidnapped. You'll be, you'll have cocaine put in with your baby grows as you import them." And I said, "No, I trust these people. I'm really struggling to make my quantities at my prices, and I trust them. I've met them face to face, and I think meeting people face to face is so important, and a problem with modern day business practices." And then but about the next 2 years, I worked with the Colombians to make a lot of our product, and they really helped me get off the ground, to the extent that we were making big enough quantities that I could bring my production back into Europe. And then by that stage, we were making in Portugal, Spain. So yes, the setbacks were one after another. And I think running any type of business is like walking through dry sand. You take 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. And the only way to survive in business is to make sure that no matter how many knockbacks you have, at the end of the year, you have a robust cash flow and some profitability. There's absolutely no point trying to overextend yourself if you haven't got the cash to underwrite it. So cash flow, throughout all your problems, you always need to forecast that they're going to come, because they will come. But how you stay positive when you know you're going to have problem after problem after problem, I think that's something that I'm just incredibly lucky with. I'm optimistic, and as I say, I'm probably a little bit unaware of risk. I'm most likely to be the child who jumps off the high diving board.
find it was quite difficult when people were, I won't say against you, but that might be, actually probably isn't extreme. The bank said no, even your own father said no.
Mm.
Was there any point you thought, I'm not cut out for this, I'm going to go and get a normal, in inverted commas, job?
Do you know what? Ironically, it took 29 years to think that, and that's when I sold the company.
Mm.
Um, because throughout all those years, whilst it was always hard, I could never give up, because from the start of JoJo, I had people working for me, and those people relied on me. And the thing about being a founder, managing director, or CEO, whatever you want to call it, is that the buck stops with you. And I'm not only responsible for the livelihoods of the people who work for me in this country, and towards the end of my tenure, we had up to 1,000 staff working for us. We had a team of 1,000 people. Sorry, I don't use the word staff. I always called them my team, because it was a team effort. But it wasn't just the responsibility towards them that kept me going. It was also, I knew so many of our factories personally. I knew the people who ran those factories. I'd worked with them. I'd found them by traveling through India, and I'd helped them grow their factories. Some of the factories we started working with had, 20 tailors when we started. By the time I had grown the business, they had 500 tailors. JoJo was not just a success story for me and my team in this country and in the countries we expanded to, but it was a success story for many, many smaller companies or bigger companies across the world who supplied us. So you can't ever accept defeat when all those people are relying on you.
Help, or this, I think it's with you, obviously correct me if I'm wrong, there is this mixture of this inbuilt hardwired drive, but things like that as well. Does that mean that when you do have a block, when you do have something which somebody could perceive as failure, you simply don't accept it as that, and you look for the learning, for the development opportunity very quickly, because that is who you are and your mindset, but also what's counting on you?
I think that deep sense of responsibility, that is something that I was brought up with, but also I feel is part of my character. Um, Absolutely, that's there, that keeps you going. But also, failure. You're right. Failure only becomes failure when you feel that you've failure only becomes failure when you feel that you've failed.
Mm.
If failure is just another mountain to climb, and if it's just a slip on that steep slope, if it's just an obstacle you've got to find a solution to, then it's not failure, it's just setback. And setbacks are there to be overcome. And there's a great children's story called "We're All Going on a Bear Hunt."
Yeah.
And the moral behind "We're All Going on a Bear Hunt" is: life throws you trouble, life throws you strife, life throws you obstacles. And as someone who wants to get through life positively and feel a sense of achievement, your challenge is tackling those problems and finding a solution. And actually, whether it's business, whether it's logistics, whether it's manufacturing, or it's business growth, it's the economy, as I say, you're just going to be throwing obstacles. And if that's not for you, then you probably don't want to run your own business, because
Mm.
actually the successes for me, the most rewarding times in my career have been when we've found a solution to a really tough problem. Ironically, those are the times when you really get a sense of satisfaction that you solved you feel useful. I think everyone needs to feel useful, and when you solve a problem, you feel useful. And
Mm.
actually, when things are plain sailing, do you know, you can become a bit complacent, and you can possibly even get bored and think, oh well, someone else can run the company, I can go off and go on long skiing holidays or whatever. Whereas when there's a fire and you're at the coal face trying to put out the flames, then you feel you're needed. And so actually I think I probably thrived through the problems,
Yeah.
even though they're tiring and they take their toll.
No,
And and
completely.
and and the last 7 years, 7.5 years now, the last 7 years since the Brexit vote, has been an absolute cacophony of difficult stages, which I think a lot has burnt a lot of people out. Yeah.
No, completely. Now, obviously, you sold JoJo and you started a whole new venture now, which is completely different. Are you finding that you are kind of meeting new blocks along your journey, or are you finding that actually all that experience you've had before, you're just applying it in new and different ways?
I think the great advantage of running a larger company is that you've employed a lot of really talented people. If you're good with your people skills, if you're good with your recruitment processes, you've employed a lot of talented people who are much better at you at specific areas, which means that you're left to do the bits that you're good at. And I had a fantastic team. Suddenly, I'm starting a new, very small business. I even run it as a sole trader. It seemed pointless doing anything else at this stage, and I am having to do everything myself again. And I'm having to relearn things. I've had a social media team for years at JoJo, and I'm having to relearn how to do social media. I'm having to relearn how to, run the marketing, even the changeovers. This week, I've been recruiting a whole new team of housekeeping, a whole new housekeeping team, and actually, I do feel that for me, it's really important to run a business that way from the startup on, because I personally don't have a massive level of confidence in being able to tell people how to do a job unless I've done it myself, even if
Yeah.
I've done it myself some time ago. And with JoJo, I did absolutely everything from running IT to, in the early years, I was even doing the bookkeeping myself, which was not a good idea because I'm not the best at the books, but I did have to do it. You have to do everything when you're a small startup. And I then felt that I was qualified to ask someone else to do it and be able to question them and have a sensible conversation with them. So with my new business, with Wonderful Escapes, I wanted to be able to learn on the way up. The question is, what do I want for my life going forwards? And do I want to build another monster company? I got out of JoJo because it was killing me, and I needed to find a renewed work-life balance. And my addiction to business and my addiction to perfection and wanting to try to be the best in our field at whatever I do does mean you become slightly obsessive about your new venture. And I saw myself in the course of last year slipping back into the same ways, having had a sort of 4-week breather between one business and the next. I saw that I was beginning to get a little bit stressed again. And actually, I'm having now to sort of take a little bit of be a little bit more strategic about where I want this one to go. Do I keep it small and beautifully formed, or
Yeah.
do I let it grow into the next big thing? And at the moment, my intention is to do things absolutely as perfectly as we possibly can and keep it quite a small business, which gives me the opportunity going forward to do other things as well as being obsessed by one business, which whilst I was at JoJo, my life really did revolve around JoJo and children's wear for a very long time. And now I feel that I actually want to learn new things. I think you never stop wanting to improve yourself and learn new areas. And I'm learning a lot at the moment through the new business, particularly in areas of sort of biodiversity and organic farming practices. And so I'm learning new things, but I'm a novice in these areas. So I need to sort of improve my skills and learn on the way. And while I'm doing that, I can build the business to be offer the perfect service and the perfect location for people to come back to the countryside and experience spending time outside in the wild whilst having a luxurious holiday.
Amazing. And the last question is, thinking about, there's lots of people who are either starting their very first business, who have maybe got a business that is challenging them because these fun things keep happening thick and fast. What tips or advice could you give to people who are in either of those situations about overcoming these blocks along the way?
I think probably my first tip is to have a strategy, and to have, I mean, in effect, strategy is a sort of slightly complex word for your list, your to-do list. And every year, I used to, between Christmas and New Year, I'd always take time off between Christmas and New Year, whilst of course being on call 24/7, because retailer, you never have proper time off. But during that period, I would be at home, my children would be playing around, and I would take time to just think, what did I want to achieve for the year ahead? Not just for the business, because of course we always had a rolling business plan, but also personally, what did I feel were the most important things? And so I could start the new year with a sort of target, which I could then refer back to see, was I achieving it? Was I going off track? Was I being pulled off on a tangent? So I think having a very clear strategic view is important. It's also important to accept that everyone makes mistakes, but sometimes you need to accept you've made a mistake and you need to draw the line before you've gone too far. I mentor quite a few business startups and young people in business. And unfortunately, I occasionally have to say to them, I'm really sorry, but I may be wrong, but I feel that you're barking up the wrong tree with this business. I don't think you should put any more capital into it. I don't think you should remortgage your house. I think you should stop, draw the line, and start again. And even though people might look at me and see the success of JoJo growing from a £2,000 loan to a company that in its heyday turned over about 70 million gross, and there were mistakes along the way. We did different ranges that didn't work. You need to be able to say, no, we've tried that, we've given it our best, but let's pull it. Let's concentrate on what's working here. So I think being able to think strategically, plan strategically, check what's working. Always, always, always vital to think that there are going to be problems. Be optimistic and positive about life, knowing that life is shit and then we die. In effect, we've got to overcome all that, and we've got to keep smiling. So I think if you kind of keep on top of that, and that third point actually involves cash flow. Absolutely, without a doubt. Most businesses fail because of lack of cash flow, and that is maybe because they've overextended in the right way or the wrong way. And I also feel that as a business owner, your wealth is in the brand. So if you're milking the brand to buy yourself unaffordable treats, holidays, silly cars, then you're really short-sighted. And personally, I drove the company van until and also had a 20-year-old car until the day I sold the company, when I did buy myself a new car. I couldn't find a van, annoyingly, but that's just me. I felt that everything that I had a mortgage until the day I sold the company, because for me, growing the brand was actually the best investment I could make. So I didn't pay myself a silly salary. So I do think, people who want to really grow their businesses should be thinking about, is that the most important thing in your life? Or actually, do you really want to own a Ferrari? In which case, if you analyze, if you're practical about business and you analyze the investment in a Ferrari and how it's going to devalue the minute you drive it out the forecourt, or that same investment in opening a new channel to your business and what that can achieve in 2 or 3 years' time, your return on capital invested, you're just going to make the sensible decision. But unfortunately, people get swayed. So I think being modest about your lifestyle, but absolutely investing like mad in your business is probably the most sensible way to go if you're looking to grow your brand.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing to chat to you. I've got loads of things to talk about there and loads of things to go on. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. To find out more about Laura, head over to Instagram and look at Laura Tenison MBE. And if you want to find more about Wonderful Escapes, look at www.wonderfulescapes.co.uk. And of course, if you haven't got a copy of the book yet, search online. You've got this with my name, Ria Freeman, or go to any good bookshop and you should find it there.